straightforward answer: does crocheting damage dreadlocks? And the answer is no and yes. And it really depends on the circumstances in which you or someone else uses a crochet needle. And I'll post some videos up throughout this video demonstrating the different shapes of crochet needles. This particular crochet needle is by Dreadhead HQ, and it's very similar to other brands out there that I would recommend, and that is because the shape of the tip is very, when it's looked at it from the side, is very similar to that of a rake. So while we do call these crochet hooks, the shape is actually that of a rake. While I don't have one with me right here right now, there's another very generic crochet hook, and that one's used out there very commonly in very large sizes, small sizes, all various kinds of sizes, and it's used for actual crocheting with thread. And the shape of that is more like a spike. It's like a spike, so it's not shaped like a hook, like a fish hook. It's actually shaped like a spike. And so, you know, in general, the difference between whether or not a hook or a crochet spike or a crochet rake is going to either help your dreadlocks mature by pulling the hair into the dreads or actually damage the dreads is really dependent upon how you use each one of these tools. Let's just imagine for right now that I have a crochet spike, a common crochet hook that you could buy on Amazon, and it's very generic. It has like a bit paler plastic handle, and kind of like a yellowish tint to a handle. And the thing about that is because it's like a spike, you can actually hear it break the hairs as you pull the hairs into the dreadlocks. Now, I've seen many tutorials on YouTube in which someone actually uses this crochet needle in order to maintain, repair, or install dreadlocks. And I can say that in the past, I've used it too. I've experimented with a variety of different hooks. And I can say that that particular one damages dreadlocks in the long run. In my personal experience, during a particular time in my life where I was depressed, I actually stopped buying this crochet hook because it's like, I think $12. It may have gone up or down in prices, and I stopped buying this crochet hook and I bought the cheaper crochet hook because it was like $6 or something like that on Amazon. And so I used that crochet hook for quite a long period, and what happened was that it actually damaged my dreadlocks using that dreadlock. See, notice I got some dreads, let's say like this one right here. See how long this dread is? Or let's say like this one right here. See how long that dread is right there? And versus this one right here. Here's the difference. You guys see those two right there? Boom, boom, boom. You know, I had used, and the same thing over here on this side right here. See how short that is? What had actually happened was I had used that crochet spike on my dreadlocks, that cheaper crochet hook that's actually used for thread, which thread is actually stronger than hair, you know, by actual technical standards. If you take a thread of hair, you can just pop it and break it with your hands. You take some thread, it's gonna take some pulling to break some thread. So, you know, that crochet spike of that cheaper brand, it actually did damage my dreadlocks over time. And only when I had realized that my dreads were becoming weaker and thinner in certain parts did I make the connection, oh man, I'm using the wrong crochet hook. And so I switched back to this brand, which has been consistently reliable, and I do recommend the Dreadhead HQ. They have a good brand. There's some other ones out there that I may mention in later videos, but they make a good crochet hook that's pretty decent. And oh, just dropped it. And so I do not recommend using the crochet hooks that are designed for thread. Thread is stronger than hair. Now let's take into mind, let's pretend that, all right, you're going to avoid that. You're going to avoid those crochet hooks. They're made for thread. They're made for something that's stronger than hair. Now you get a crochet hook that's designed for dreadlocks. That's actually designed for dreadlocks. The shape of it is different. The tip of it is different. And the tip of this particular crochet hook is shaped like a rake. And with the technique which I use to pull hair into a dreadlock, I'm actually pulling the hair across my thumb into the dread. So I can feel the hair going in, as well as whenever I'm pulling some hair into a dread, there's actually a sound. There's a sound when hair goes into the dread versus when you just pull it and you can hear the sound, hear the hair breaking. Now, what actually determines whether or not the hair breaks or gets pulled in depends on the density of the dread and if you're paying attention to your motion of the pulling. Remember, hair is not as strong as thread, so if you pull it too much, you pull it all the way through, or if the dread itself is too dense, then it can pull the hair or pull hair as you're pulling the hook through. Whereas if, say for instance, in new dreadlocks and fresh dreadlock, where the hair is relatively loose, there's minimal to no damage, even for someone just pulling the crochet hook in at a general pace. Now, when you get really good at this, and when you know what to pay attention to, the sound and the feel of the hair being pulled into the dread, you can pretty much stay within a certain range to where you avoid the extreme. If you pull too far or you pull too much, you can hear the hair breaking. If you stick the needle in areas where the dread is too dense, you can hear the hair breaking. So typically, as a professional loctician, I avoid those extremes of pulling. If I don't pull it enough, the hair doesn't go in. So there's a balance. There's a middle point in between those two extremes in which the hair goes in without actually damaging the dread. Now, take that into consideration. Let's pretend that, all right, you followed that advice. You found that middle point where you can hear the difference between the hair going into the dread, and you can hear and you can feel the difference of the hair being pulled into the dread, and you can see that as you're pulling the hair into the dread, you see the hair going into the dread. One mistake that, say, a typical person using a crochet hook, no matter what kind of size or shape the hook actually is that you as the person using the hook, you want to pay attention to the hair going into the dread. If you're putting the hook in and you're pulling the hook out back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but you're not seeing the hair go into the dread, you're doing something wrong. The whole point of putting the hook into the dread is so that you can pull the hair into the dread, and if you're not seeing that hair go from one end inside of it and seeing it disappear, then you're doing something wrong, and you need to refine and pay attention to what you are doing so that you can really see your technique in action, and so that you're not actually damaging your dreads or someone else's dreads by effect. Now, there's also the aspect of when you're dealing with fully mature, so that's three qualities that we've addressed so far, in which could determine whether or not your crocheting could damage or not damage a dreadlock. So let's move on to the fourth characteristic that, just off the top of my head, is in certain circumstances you cannot use a crochet hook in order to repair a dreadlock. Now, if you're installing dreadlocks, typically the hair is malleable enough that a crochet hook is perfectly fine. Whereas if you're repairing a dreadlock, it depends on the maturity of the dreadlock. And as well as if, say, adding extensions to a dreadlock, it depends on the maturity of the dreadlock. Because if the dread is too mature, and I say too mature, it's almost like a rock. It's so hard that if you stick the needle in and you pull the needle through it, it's bound to break every single hair that comes through it, because the hair is so tight. There's no leeway. It's not like some hair on the outside can get pulled to the inside. That hair on the outside gets pulled a little bit and it snaps, and it catches something else and it snaps and it snaps and snaps and snaps and snaps. But in those typical circumstances, you may not be able to get a hook in there anyways. Or if you do put the hook in there, the dread itself will break the hook, depending on how often you have used the hook and what the hook's made out of and the durability of the hook. I've used one particular hook. I don't have it with me, but I've used the hook so often that when I actually got a new hook and I compared the tips, I can see that the usage of that hook, I had actually worn away the tip of the tool itself, to where it wasn't even shaped like a rake at the end. It was actually shaped more like a little bulb. So I was like, No wonder it was so much more difficult to do the dreadlocks themselves, because of this bulb that was going in there. And so, but because the shape of the tip of the tip of the actual crochet hook got worn away over time after using it for months and months and months on head after head after head after head. Now I'll bring up another quality that can determine the effects as whether or not a crochet hook will damage a dread or actually help you mature a dreadlock by creating the knots. You know, that's really what we use a crochet hook for, to speed up the process, to sculpt the hair into the shape of the desired dreadlock, or to repair it so that it's more of the ideal that you're looking for. And so the next characteristic that could really determine how effective a crochet hook is the cleanliness of the hair. If you have, say, artificial oils in your hair, and so if there's artificial oils in your hair from the hair products that you're using and they leave residues, it gets this greasiness texture to the hair. And what that actually does is when you take the crochet needle and you crochet needle when you take that and you try to pull the hair into the dreadlock, it actually slips. On the hair. And so it takes more strokes in order to get the hair into the same spot inside the dreadlock. And if it's taking more strokes to get this little bit of hair on the outside of the dread to get it to the inside of the dread, that means it's spending more time going through the inside of the dread versus, you know, one stroke outside, grab the hair, pull it in. That's one stroke on the inside, outside, and one stroke to the inside. Whereas if you're missing it because the hair is greasy, that's a whole bunch of insides and only one outside that's going to eventually be successful and pull the hair in. So potentially you have, you know, this inside part of the dread that's getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, while the outside hair that you want to get into the dreadlock still isn't in there. And so, and as that inside portion gets tighter and tighter and tighter, it can damage it can start ripping hairs on the inside. If you're not paying attention to this, remember there's a sound to it, there's a feel to it, and you can actually see if what you're doing is actually doing anything. So you want to pay attention to these qualities in order to determine whether or not your crocheting is actually helping the situation or harming the situation. Now, there's one more circumstance that comes to mind in which you can determine whether or not crocheting is the best method for your particular situation. Or say, for instance, you might even employ a double crochet hook, and I actually made this crochet hook. You know, it's a bit narrower than typical crochet hooks out there that are double, and I prefer this. It makes the dreads much tighter, much more quickly, especially with installing new dreadlocks. I basically can cut the time by a third. But you know, in one of these circumstances in which I determine whether or not I use this one or this one, there is a unique situation in which when I get clients that go to the beach a lot, and when those clients go to the beach a lot, what actually happens is that the core of the dreadlock starts to mature before the outside hair. And this is particularly prominent as an issue in people that have medium to large dreadlocks. And so what actually happens, it can make, using crocheting their dreadlocks, I mean, they turn out beautiful when I get done with them, and I'll show you some pictures. They turn out beautiful when I get done with them. But the process of crocheting it, what happens is that as I'm pulling those hairs, let's say this has got the core of the dreadlock, and you got the dreadlock out here, and then you got these hairs. As I'm sticking the needle through and I'm pulling the hairs into the dreadlock one by one by one by one, what actually happens is this can be a painful process for people, because the core of that dreadlock, it's straight hair. It's straight hair, it's stuck where it is, and as I grab these hairs that are loose and I pull them to the core, oftentimes the hook grabs the core hair as I'm pulling in the outside hair, and it's basically just pulling on the scalp directly with no give. And in those kind of circumstances, it can, one, be very painful for the client, and two, I can be breaking the hairs on the inside of the dreadlock if I'm not careful about what I'm doing. Now, there's not a huge lot of consequences for that, especially if, say, for instance, my ratio to outside hair to getting that hair from the outside to the inside is a 1-to-1. per stroke. Because ideally, when I stick my hook through the dread and I catch the hair on the outside and I pull it across my thumb, every stroke gives me at least one hair. Oh, boom, 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 boom. In the worst case situation, you'll see somebody going, and then it was like somebody I'm teaching me, like somebody that I'm teaching, they're going this, and say, well, how do I do? I was like, you see hair on the outside of that dread, right? Like, that means you didn't pull it in there yet. Why are you asking me how you're doing when the evidence of what you're doing is right there in front of your eyes? So it's about looking and seeing and hearing and feeling and sensing what it is you're doing and making sure that it's giving you the results that you want. Now, if you want to break some dreads, if you want to break some hair, if you want to damage some dreads, there's a nifty way to do it. And I don't recommend doing this if you like to keep your dreadlocks. But you'll oftentimes see a tool like this out there, and it's actually this one's made for dreadlocks, and they suggest that it's made to break the inside of the hairs of the dreadlocks to help it mature and knot up quicker. I don't use it, but it's actually a felting needle. And if you ever see somebody use a felting needle on your dreadlocks, I would say be wary, because that is asking for trouble. All along this needle, of this felting needle, they are like little spikes, little razor blades. This needle is going to destroy a dreadlock if you start sticking it. And I had a client recently who told me that they tried to get the strays of their dreads, and get that put in with the needle like this, and they said, oh, I'm using a crochet needle. No, that's a felting needle. That's for felt. That's for wool. Wool is a much stronger hair than human hair. If you ever get a chance to grab some wool and play with it, you can actually shape it with a felting needle. And you can do that with the crochet needle as well. But you'll notice that it rarely ever breaks the wool, because wool is so much stronger. Just like the thread. Thread is often made with cotton or with wool, and it's so much stronger than hair. And if you use a felting needle, these needles with all these freaking spikes on it, if you use one of these needles, you're going to destroy your dreadlocks or destroy someone else's dreadlocks. So I highly recommend not ever using this. Now, off the top of my head, these are the best tips that I have in recommendation of whether or not you should or shouldn't use a crochet needle. Because the density and the maturity of your dreadlocks will determine whether or not crocheting is best for you or is in alignment with your desires. But in typical, when someone has new growth, those stray hairs along the roots, it's perfectly safe to use a crochet hook if that crochet hook is designed for dreadlocks. And when I mean designed for dreadlocks, at the very least, it should not have a spike as the tip. A spike is like anything else. It punctures. And the tip is actually shaped like a triangle, like it's shaped like this. It's like, so hair gets in there, it's not going anywhere except potentially getting cut. And that's my highest recommendation, is that if you're gonna use crochet hooks or get your dreads crocheted, make sure that the person who is crocheting it is using the right tool for the job, because you do not want them to say accidentally damage your dreads because they haven't given enough attention to actually see the kind of tool that they're using and actually put one and one together to make two to determine whether or not this hook is actually helping them in the long term or actually damaging the results and the quality of the work that they're doing in the long term. So these are the best tips that I have as far as answering this very simple question: does crocheting damage dreadlocks? Like I said before, the answer is no and yes. It depends on how you use the crochet hook, and if you're using it under the right circumstances, and if you're paying attention to what you are doing, watching what you're doing, feeling what you're doing, and listening to the sound, because there is a sound to when the hair is actually being pulled in, and you can see when the hair is actually being pulled in and you can feel when the hair is actually being pulled in. When these three characteristics are combined together, it's perfectly safe to use a crochet hook in order to maintain, repair, install dreadlocks or extensions. And of course, I do this for a living. This is what I do. My name is Michael, Dr. Lockstar. I am, that's a spiritual reference, by the way. And if you would like more tips about dreadlocks, please leave a comment, shoot me a question. I'll make a video about it. Anything you're interested in relationship, dreadlocks, psychology, my experience, my preferences, or my services. Hey, check me out at drlockstar.com. You can also check me out on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, and all that good jazz. And I will look forward to making more videos for you in the future. All you have to do is let me know what you want to know, and I will share that information as personal knowledge from my personal experience for you, for your amusement and education.